Hare Krishna. A warm welcome and very good evening to our Gita Essence series. Yesterday, we discussed about the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is setting the context, observing the army. And today is very important chapter that we're going to discuss, very famously known as Gita summarized as well. This is the whole summary of Bhagavad Gita. So without any further due delay, I would like to invite the instructor of this course, his guest lecturer, for giving us the wisdom of what chapter 2 Bhagavad Gita says. So I invite you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Over to
Hare
you.
Krishna, Shekhar Prabhu.
Please, Prabhuji.
So, shall we start the program?
Yes, Prabhuji.
The sound is okay? All right. And the presentation is visible, right? So, Hare Krishna. So, once again, thank you for joining in for the second episode of Gita Essence series. I'll offer prayers, and after that, we'll start our discussion for today. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनाशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So, Hare Krishna. Once again, thank you all for joining in. Beginning with our today's discussion. So, yesterday we started with the Gita Essence series, wherein we're going to study all the 18 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. Not, of course, too descriptive or either details, but summary form, just to give you overview to help us relate to the message of Bhagavad Gita and, of course, various lessons. We're definitely going to touch upon all the important themes, only with an exception of not going into details with it. So, yesterday we started with our very first episode of Gita Essence, titled as Crisis Management. This particular episode was based on the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, titled as Arjun Vishad Yog, or as Srila Prabhupada wrote in English, the what was that? Observing the armies, like that. So, Bhagavad Gita, we titled this particular chapter for the context of our discussion as crisis management. Like that, for every chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we have given a particular tagline or a theme. So, why did we chose or we call that yesterday's first session of Bhagavad Gita as crisis management? We saw that how Arjuna, who was a chosen hero, a selected hero, either by Vyasadeva or Lord Shri Krishna, or the favorite among all the Pandavas, the choice for all to defeat Kauravas, the one who was selected by Srila Vyasadeva personally to travel to the heavenly planets. Vyasadeva personally came and gave the mantra to Yudhishthira Maharaj and instructed Yudhishthira to give the same mantra to Arjuna, with the help of which he can literally fly, not walk. Means he can run without getting exhausted and very quickly reach to the higher altitudes of the Himalayas, from where Arjuna can further travel to Indralok. So Indra went and traveled, lived with Indra for 5 years, acquired celestial weapons and whatnot. For 12 years, Vanvas, 1 year Agyatwas, that whole 13 years, there was only one thing in mind: to punish the culprits. Please mind, Arjuna was a Kshatriya, administrator, and as an administrator, it was his responsibility to award justice. Don't be confused about the role play of Arjuna. He was not a doctor, he was not an IT engineer. He was, in fact, the decision maker, the one who had to punish the culprit. And the victim in this story right now was Arjuna himself, Arjuna's family. His elder brother Yudhishthira Maharaj was deprived of his rightful heir in the kingdom. His wife Draupadi, who was so uh, violently abused in the assembly, where hundreds and thousands of men were personally aware, and she had to beg for her life and her integrity like that. So Arjuna had to punish the culprit, and he actually prepared for it. And today, after 13 long years waiting, when he's there on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, suddenly his mind changes, and now he says, I don't want to fight. Of course, external crisis was there where there was war which was about to begin. Arjuna was not perturbed or disturbed because of the external crisis. However, there was a far greater internal crisis which began in the heart of Arjuna when he saw his relatives, his friends, his well wishers, his teachers standing in front of him on the side of Adharma, which unfortunately Arjuna could not see. Arjuna just saw his relatives, but he didn't realize that the relatives chose to be on the side of Adharma. And because they chose that, they deserve to be punished because they came voluntary. Yudhishthira Maharaj, in fact, before the war had begun, he had announced if anyone wants to change the sides, you can do it now before the war begins. But Bhishma, Pitama, Drona, Kripa, and many others, they decide to stay on the side of Kauravas. So they deserve to be punished. So nonetheless, Arjuna is bewildered. He is into deep state of chaos, not knowing what to do. So on this, uh, with this context, we discussed yesterday. The message of Bhagavad Gita is very relevant for all of us. Why it is relevant for all of us? The reason is the situations which leads to crisis could be different for us than for Arjuna, but generally the response is the same. And what is the response when a person is faced with crisis and when he's not able to deal with crisis, when he becomes demoralized or hopeless, not able to find a solution, then he raises his hand and says, I quit. Something similar had happened with Arjuna. So the message of Bhagavad Gita, what it teaches is, it does not changes the situation for us. However, it fixes our response. It teaches us how to respond to the situation of crisis. Therefore, we had titled this particular session as Crisis Management, where it is a seed sowing, hope giving chapter one, which actually teaches us that how, by the end of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's response changed to the same similar situation of crisis. Similarly, for us, when we understand the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita, we'll learn to give a better response to the impending crisis, which is inevitable. With that as a little background, let's begin with the session for today. Sorry, before we get into the session, a quick recap of some very important lessons that we had discussed yesterday. So, this is verses wise. In the very first verse of chapter 1, we had discussed the concept of I and mine philosophy of Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, where Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, for their own selfish interest, were willing to sacrifice everyone's life. Not only they were willing to sacrifice everyone's life because of their own selfish interest, they were never ever happy. They were always hopeless, depressed, filled with fear, anger, and envy towards others, particularly Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira never ever took Duryodhana as an enemy, despite what not Duryodhana planned or attempted to kill Pandavas several times. Yet Yudhishthira Maharaj never took Duryodhana to be his enemy, but for Duryodhana, Yudhishthira Maharaj was his enemy. We had also compared the psychology or the mindset of Duryodhana with that of Arjuna, where we saw that how Arjuna was willing. For example, we had given the story of Arjuna and Duryodhana going to seek help of Lord Shri Krishna. Arjuna immediately asked for Lord Shri Krishna, whereas Duryodhana was happy, was delighted, in fact, wanted to get the Narayani Sena. So the point is, when a person is caught up in I and mind consciousness, then his life becomes hopeless. He is not only a danger for oneself but also to the society. Whereas Yudhishthira and Arjuna represents the consciousness which abided by the laws of the Lord, which followed the wisdom of Lord or the instructions of the Lord. There is a very interesting twist that happens in chapter 1, which I would like to reiterate so that at least setting of the scene is clear. There are two characters in the first chapter who are described to experience bewilderment, uneasy, unsteadiness of the mind because of selfish interest. One was Duryodhan. Who was the other person? You keep thinking, I'll give you answer in a short while. From second verse up to verse number 12, we saw when Sanjay described about the Kauravas army that how Duryodhan, despite having all material security in the form of Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, who cannot be defeated, and abundant of material resources in terms of the Narayani Sena, having a far greater, the military army with them, despite of all these assurances, Duryodhan was still fearful. And there were two things that we had discussed in this. One was the team spirit of Pandava's army. Second, everyone, team spirit of Pandavas. And second, everyone followed Krishna. Everyone had a lot of respect for Yudhishthira and Krishna. And the second concept that we have discussed was shared leadership versus singular leadership. In the Kauravas army, there was a singular leadership, whereas in the case of Pandavas, the leadership was shared. Drishtadumna was commander in chief, who followed Arjuna. Arjuna followed Krishna. And below Drishtadumna, there were seven different commanders who were the representatives or the leaders of seven Akshauhani Sena, like that. So these are some of the things. And second thing that we discussed, why Duryodhana was fearful. The lesson is because there was no God consciousness. Duryodhana was too much caught up on his own strength. Therefore, when Sanjay began to describe the third set of verses from 13 to 20, he described that how Pandavas were fearless. Despite having Krishna standing with them without any weapons, who's not going to fight in the war, and Arjuna have just lost the whole Narayani Sena to Duryodhana, by any common sense or any logic, anyone would blame Arjuna, would call Arjuna to be a fool to have Krishna, who's not going to fight in the war, and let Narayani Sena go into the hands of Duryodhana. No. Pandavas knew, Arjuna knew very well, if Krishna is there, then everything is there. So the dependency on Krishna, our faith on Krishna, determines our fearlessness. Duryodhana had no faith on Krishna. In fact, he was against Krishna. Therefore, he always lived in fear. Whereas Arjuna, Yudhishthira, everyone else in the Pandavas camp were fully sheltered and protected under the care of Lord Shri Krishna. They had that faith, therefore they were fearless. And then the fourth section from verses 21 to 27, we saw how Arjuna instructed Krishna to bring his chariot in the middle of the army, in the middle of the war, or the battlefield. War has not started yet. And the Krishna, Purna Purushottam Bhagwan, was given a red carpet welcome in the Bhagavad Gita, not as a hero, but as a driver of the hero, who turned out to be Arjuna as a hero of the Battle of Mahabharata, interestingly. So Krishna entry in Mahabharata is as a charioteer, a very, very simple menial job, to be done, to be performed like that. So we had discussed that how Krishna, the relationship between devotee and the Lord, is very confidential and very interesting. It's very difficult to figure it out who is actually Lord and who is a devotee, because devotee always want to serve Lord, and Lord always does everything that what devotee wants. So now how do you figure out who is serving whom? Because everyone is eager to serve each other. That's the beauty. Another second very, very interesting point and very important to mark for yourself is how did Arjuna's bewilderment begin? Arjuna's bewilderment began when Krishna said, Arjuna, now see. Observe the army. Observe your great grandfather Bhishma Pitama Dronacharya, your teacher who's standing in front of you. And according to spiritual wisdom, when a person sees with his eyes, he becomes illusioned. And through the process of hearing through the ears, his illusion is driven away. So, very important principle Lord Shri Krishna establishes right in the very first chapter, that whenever a person sees with his eyes, he's not actually seeing through his eyes, he's seeing through the perception. Perceptions are based on the knowledge. and that knowledge gives a certain kind of a faith, and that's how the perceptions are formed. And that knowledge comes through the process of hearing. So if you want to see, our seeing should not be dependent on our eyes, it should be dependent on what we hear. Therefore, we say Shastra Chakshu. Our vision should be based on scriptural knowledge. You understood the whole process of seeing? Our seeing is dependent on our perceptions. Our perceptions are created by the knowledge, and our perceptions are created by our faith. Our faith is created by knowledge, and knowledge is acquired through hearing. So Krishna says, now you see, Pashyatan, and then Krishna says, now you hear. And at the end of hearing, Arjuna is able to see the same situation in the right perspective or context. And then comes the fourth section of the chapter 1, verse number 28 to 30th, where Arjuna becomes bewildered. So, as I said, there are two people who are described to be bewildered in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita because of selfish interest. First was Duryodhana, and second was Arjuna, who became bewildered because of selfish interest. And what was that selfish interest that Arjuna himself speaks in the last section of the chapter 1, where he talks about, oh, my dear Lord, if I kill everyone in this war, all my relatives, friends will die. With whom would I enjoy? Even if we win the unrivaled kingdom, with whom would we enjoy the kingdom when there won't be any family, friends, relatives? Like that, he began to speak. What about the sin that I will accrue? But he forgot his responsibility. He was supposed to punish the culprit. They were the victims. His wife was the victim. Yudhishthira was a victim. And the Kauravas were the culprit, and they deserved to be punished. It is not the war was initiated by Yudhishthira Maharaj. The war was initiated by the Kauravas, headed by Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, because they were not willing to negotiate. So we had discussed a very important concept. Under the lack of spiritual education, wherein person does not know who is he, who is the Supreme Lord, and what is their relationship with each other, the person is bound to become and remain confused, bewildered, and time and again keep making mistakes, making wrong decisions, just like Arjuna has made a wrong decision of saying, I shall not fight. And finally, we saw in the last section that how selfish interest blinds or actually makes you spiritually blinded. It's not that Arjuna was not educated on the spiritual subject matter, but once he began to think about his own selfish interest, he forgot the greater interest. He got into the consciousness of I and mine. So even a practicing spiritualist can recede through the position of Duryodhana when a person begins to think in the context of I and mine over the context of or the perspective of we. The right way of thinking is what is good for all of us, then thinking about what is good only for me. Arjuna began to think what is good for me, therefore he was bewildered. And therefore we concluded the chapter 1 by saying the message of Bhagavad Gita prepares us for the impending crisis. So two kind of people who got bewildered. One was Duryodhana, who was thinking about his pleasure, and he was definitely very sinful. So he didn't care for God, he didn't care for scriptures. He just wanted to become the unraveled king of the whole world, and that was only possible when Pandavas would cease to live. That was his objective, to kill the Pandavas. Whereas in the case of Arjuna, definitely he had got caught up with his selfish interest, but he was not sinful. The claims or the points that he made to Lord Shri Krishna for not fighting were all based on the principle of either compassion or a religious, it was not against the principle of dharma. Definitely, a cruel sinful reaction was correct. If you kill your elders, there will be a sinful reaction from one perspective. So, however, Arjuna forgot. Arjuna was more concerned of his own pleasure, but he forgot the soul is eternal, body is temporary, and when body grows old, anyways, body has to die. The soul has to move on. So he forgot the basic concept of spirituality, because of which he decided to give up his duty. And the principle which is established by Krishna through the message of Bhagavad Gita is whatever happens, one has to stick to his duty ordained in the scriptures as ordered by the Supreme Personality Godhead. One has to stick to his responsibilities and duties. And these are the 5 reasons that Arjuna gave of not fighting: compassion, enjoyment, fear of sinful reactions, destructions of family tradition, indecision, like that. So, with this, we come to our chapter 2, title which we are titling today as Inner Awakening. This is one of the longest chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and I'm looking at my watch. The recap took a little longer, so I don't know how we can really cover this chapter even in 40 minutes approximately that we may have now, but we'll try to do some justice to it. In case if little time spills over, so bear with me. I may take 5 to 10 minutes extra at the end. Maybe. I'm not saying for sure, but maybe it could be. So, chapter 2, we have titled it as Inner Awakening. What it means? Bhagavad Gita, through this chapter, beginning from chapter 2, until now it was called as Arjun Gita, because until chapter 1, Arjuna was speaking and Krishna was hearing. Chapter 2 onwards, it becomes Bhagavad Gita, because now Lord Shri Krishna would begin to speak. So, message of Bhagavad Gita teaches us or introduces us to a concept of yoga. Yoga, which means the process of linking or connecting with the Supreme Lord. That is called as Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, etc., which will be described in the rest of the Bhagavad Gita. By following this process of yoga, anyone in any situation and from any past, any background, can attain to the state of self-realization or can undergo inner awakening. What happens when one attains to the state of self-realization or undergoes inner awakening? It comes to the state of consciousness where nothing of the external world or external environment troubles him anymore. He does not have any longings, any material desires. He is not elated when life is great. He is not depressed with their troubled times. And he's in the consciousness where he keeps on moving forward and experiencing more and more of spiritual joy, and wherein he begins to actually experience his direct relationship with the Supreme Lord. And that opportunity of experiencing and having a direct relationship with the Lord is being provided through the instructions of Lord Shri Krishna himself, through his instructions as Bhagavad Gita. And anyone and everyone can take the advantage of it. Only thing is, there should be a willingness to accept the message. And it's a very easy and sublime process. That is what has been described beginning from chapter 2, which is titled as Contents of Gita Summarized. Here, all the concepts of Bhagavad Gita, which would be elaborated from third chapter onward, are briefly spoken about. So, I'll be a little quick. In this chapter, there are key subjects, three key subjects which have been discussed or described. The first, Lord Shri Krishna speaks about the fundamental aspect of spiritual wisdom. That is, I am not the body, but spirit soul. Then, what is a practical application of this wisdom that I am not the body, but spirit soul? And third, the symptoms of a person who has fully realized this spiritual wisdom. These are the three high level subject matters or subjects which are being discussed in chapter 2. And once again, to make the subject matter easy, I'm going to refer to the acronym by His Grace Sadaput Prabhu, which is given as Gita. This chapter has been divided into 4 parts. Let's begin with first section, where G stands for Guru. A very important section that marks the beginning of one's spiritual life, and that is to take a shelter of bona fide Guru. Arjuna, by this point of time, was determined not to fight, but simultaneously he was confused if his decision is right or wrong. He seemed at times convinced about his arguments, while other times he was not. So, when a person is faced with such predicaments, or let me put it this way, when you're faced with a crisis, and despite making all his attempts to resolve that crisis, if he's unsuccessful, there are only 2 ways to deal with it. First, I quit because I can't do anything with it. I've been trying my best to deal with it, so I quit. And unfortunately, many people take this path where people develop suicidal thoughts and they end up committing suicides. We see that in human civilization these days. A lot of youngsters commit that. College students commit suicide, take an extreme step. This is, I would say, a pessimistic approach. I would say this is an approach taken by losers, But the winner's approach, those who really want to deal with crisis and go beyond it, what is their approach would be, which actually Arjuna is going to take now, is to seek guidance of superiors. And that is what Arjuna is going to do in this set of verses where he will surrender to Krishna. And that's the point here. So Arjuna tells Krishna, my dear Lord, please guide me. A very beautiful verse. You can recite along with me. Karpanya dosho pahata swabhava prachami tvam dharma samuda chetaha yashreyasyanishritam bruhitan me shishyasteham sadimam tvam prapannam. My dear Lord, Karpanya dosho pahata sabhava, because of my own faults and weakness of heart, I'm not able to make the right decision. Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava prachami, therefore I inquire from you. Prachami tvam dharma, I inquire from you, tvam dharma, about what is the best thing that I should do, what is the right thing for me to do. Prachami tvam dharma, why am I inquiring from you? Samuda chetaha, my intelligence, my chetna, my consciousness has got totally bewildered. Yashreyasyanishitam bruhitan me. Please, you tell me what is in my best interest and why I'm asking you this and why you should tell me. For example, let's say a friend gives you an advice. We don't take it seriously, isn't it? Whose advice we take it seriously? Only when we accept that person as our teacher or a guru. When we respect him with that perspective, only then the advice is taken seriously. So, Yashrehasya Nishitam Bruhitan me Nishitam, confidently, my dear Lord, you tell me confidently what is in best interest of me. Why? Why Krishna may say, why should I tell you? Arjuna, you're my friend. Anyways, one friend doesn't listen to another friend because of the casual relationship. So Arjuna says, no Lord, no Krishna. Of course, he's not saying Lord, no Krishna. Shishyaste ham sadimam tvam prapannam. Today onwards, I accept you as my guru. Therefore, please guide me. Very, very interesting thing. How many of you agree? It is very, very difficult to acknowledge one's weakness. That yes, I have this fault. How many of you say yes? It is very difficult. If you think, those of you who are online can type in, those who are sitting here, they can raise their hand. That if you think it's very difficult to acknowledge own faults. That's the first thing. Second thing is, how many of you think it is more difficult to confess one's weakness to a senior or to another person? Acknowledging that I have it is a one thing, and confessing it another battle to win. Yes or no? Once again, how many of you agree? Raise your hand. Those who are online can type yes or no. What it takes to be able to do this, and that is humility. Arjuna, please try to understand, Arjuna, the best warrior in the world. Everyone is like, there is an India-Pakistan cricket match, and if Sachin Tendulkar is on the crease, so everyone knows India can win. As long as Sachin Tendulkar is not out, India will definitely win it. I'm just giving a very, very gross example. So Arjuna is there means no way. There's no chance for Kauravas to win. Pandavas will win it. Such a high expectations are there. You have been declared to be the best of the men. You have gone and lived in the kingdom of Indra where your elder brother Yudhishthira Maharaj could not go. The not only the people of this world, the people of the heavenly kingdom praise you for your intelligence, for your courage, for your bravery. Now we don't have even a one iota of good quality or something to be proud of, yet we are so proud of ourselves. Point is, when Arjuna already had so much qualification, how much proud he must be. But he was not proud. He was humble, and that humility allowed him to identify Karpanya doshu pahata sabhava, is my fault, and confess. So it's only possible when there is humility. It takes a lot of courage and humility to accept failure and one's own weakness. Yes or no? It's only possible when one is humble, and it takes a lot of courage also. But unless we accept it, We cannot succeed in life. Therefore, it is said, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. Nobody wants to take a responsibility of a failure. So that's the power of humility. Arjuna was humble, and this humility gave him the strength to acknowledge and take responsibility of his weaknesses. Humility is not a weakness, humility is, in fact, the greatest strength. Because unless we acknowledge our own weakness, we cannot find a solution to fix that weakness. And unless we can fix the weakness, how can we ever be progressive? So Arjuna's behavior and a response in this situation teaches us some very valuable lessons. Let's quickly review that. Lesson number one: unless we acknowledge our own deficiencies, until then we cannot accept any guidance. And unless we accept any guidance, how can we rise above our weaknesses? Yes or no? When you are sick, when you know you're sick, then you go to doctor, and then doctor gives you the pill, you take the pill, isn't it? When you think you're healthy, even if the doctor comes to your house and gives you the medicine, you'll not take it. So the journey of progressive life begins with when you learn the art of self introspection, where we introspect and see the flaws within oneself rather than judging and commenting about the flaws in others. Second thing, Arjuna, a warrior, a person of the caliber of Arjuna, if he can have a weakness of heart, तो हम तो किस खेत की मूली हैं? As I say in Hindi, who the hell are we that we think that I would not have any problems or the flaws? Second lesson, to be progressive in life, it is essential to cultivate humility because it protects us from being falsely proud of our accomplishments and strengths, which otherwise can prove futile in another situation or environment. I'm particularly speaking this point because Arjuna was later on defeated by a bunch of cowherd boys. His all strength, his knowledge of mantra failed at that point of time. He was totally humbled. So it protects us from being falsely proud. Third lesson, the fundamental step in spirituality is to accept a guru who comes in an authentic lineage of spiritual teachers and who has mastered the spiritual art. Please understand and note, most things in our life requires guidance and instructions from a qualified teacher. Similarly, the spiritual discipline is no different. If you're going to run for an Olympics in a relay race, or you're going to swim, going to take part in the competition, you need a coach. You want to study, you need a coach. For everything, there is a coach or there is a guru. Similarly, the spiritual discipline is no different. It is utterly foolish for somebody who wants to make a progress in spiritual life to think, I can read by myself and become progressive. Can somebody read by oneself and become a doctor? You may think to be, will have to sincerely pray for your patients' well-being if they come to you. You know? So one who accepts himself as a guru, very interesting quotation actually said, one who accepts himself as a guru accepts a fool as a disciple. I hope you got the meaning. So as we all know, Arjuna, after hearing Bhagavad Gita, fought the battle and won the war. So what seemed impossible for him in the beginning became possible. In other words, how did he do so? Actually teaches us, brings out three keys to success from Arjuna's life or the decision making at this point of time. So three keys to success. First, he was always eager to learn. He never gave up on learning. Second, he was humble and acknowledged his weaknesses. Third, he accepted a bona fide teacher to guide him through the life challenges. And that is what made Arjuna a success. Moving to the next section, which is called as I for identity, from verse number 11 to 30, when now Krishna begins to speak, where Arjuna have surrendered and have accepted Krishna to be Guru. So now Krishna begins to speak, and the very first thing Krishna does is chastisement to Arjuna. You rascal, Krishna says. Not as softly as I said. Krishna was really angry when Krishna said. So Krishna is controller of both the matter and the spirit. We'll see that in the 7th chapter. This is the 7th chapter principle. Krishna tells Arjuna here, Krishna chastises Arjuna and tells him, uh, Panditaha, no, he says, what is it? Pragyavadam sabhasase. Hey Arjuna, you're talking like a very learned man, but you are a fool. You do not know anything. So, what is a learned man? There are three things. First thing for a learned man is he knows the difference between the soul and matter. He understands soul to be eternal, matter to be temporary. Body is born and destined to be destroyed, whereas soul is eternal. That's the first thing. Second thing, the learned man knows he is able to distinguish between matter and spirit, and he knows to whom does the matter and spirit belongs, to Krishna, the Supreme Lord. And third thing, is able to differentiate between the body and soul, where body is temporary and soul is eternal. So after this, Krishna begins to, as I said, the very first aspect of second chapter is the fundamental aspect of spiritual knowledge, the foundation, and that begins with who am I? Most of the people, in fact, almost 99.9% population in the world undergoes identity crisis. What is identity crisis? Just like at the time of birth, before I speak about the birth, let me ask this question to all of you. How many of you, or how many of you here chose your parents that you have today? How many of you here chose your nationality? How many of you chose your skin color? How many of you chose your gender, etc., etc.? How many of us? Probably none of us. When we were born, we were like a blank slate. We had no idea. We didn't even have a mother and father. Everything was told to us. So our journey of life from birth to death is pretty strange and amusing from one perspective. Why? Because when we are born and before birth, we don't have any of these identities which are stamped on our forehead as soon as we take birth. We are stamped on our forehead with certain name belonging to so and so family, a gender, a nationality, a religion, etc., etc. And rest of our life goes in defending these tags, defending this temporary tags. And the moment a person dies, none of these tags exist beyond death. These tags were put to the body, and when a person dies, according to different cultures, they treat dead body differently. In some culture, they throw the dead body in the forest for the wild animals to eat. And this body, who we have nurtured and cared for all of our life, finally becomes a stool of an animal. In some culture, they burn the dead body, so ultimately we get consumed by fire. In some culture, the body is buried, which is eaten by worms and whatnot. Again, becomes a stool of a worm like that. In some culture, the body is drowned into the dead body is drowned into the river water. Again, it goes and gets stuck somewhere, gets decomposed and whatnot, like that. So, rest of our life, we were taking care of this body, thinking this body is all in all. I am so and so. My identity is so and so. When we die, nothing of it exists. So Srila Prabhupada would often ask this question: you are so much worried about your body. At the end of the day, it's going to become the stool of a worm or of an animal. Is that what you are actually investing all your time and energy for? Therefore, is a very important subject matter to discuss and ask: who am I? Am I the body or a soul? Therefore, Krishna says, Dehinosmin yatha dehi kaumaram yavanam jara tata dehantara prate dhirastatra namuyati. Let me give you a graphical presentation of it. Krishna says to Arjuna, Arjuna, from boyhood to youth, youth to old age, you keep on changing. Your physical form keeps on changing, but there is something which is constant and consistent all through all these different stages of your life, that is soul, that remains consistent with you. At one point of time, you die. When you die, the soul passes on to and accepts a new body. However, one who is learned, he does not get bewildered about it. Let me ask this question. Please, at the end of the session today, dig out your 10 or 15-year-old photo. I'm pretty sure you'll find it difficult to recognize yourself. What you looked 15 years or 10 years before and what you look today, probably would be quite different. So body is always changing. Krishna says one who is learned does not get bewildered. And Krishna in the 22nd verse gives a wonderful analogy. He's saying he tells, just like when the clothes becomes old, when they're torn, you throw it away in the garbage. Similarly, when the body becomes old, the spirit gives away the body and is awarded with another set of body based on one's karmic reaction. That's another subject, how we get the body. But just like a person accepts a new dress, similarly, the soul accepts a new dress. So, falling points are addressed here. Spirit soul is eternal, never changing. It is a body that changes. Spirit soul gets a new set of body based on his karmic reactions. One who is sober, a learned person, he does not get bewildered with this changing situation. So, what is death? The 22nd verse I just described to you as what Krishna tells Arjuna. Not only this, in 20th verse, Krishna tells Arjuna, Arjuna, you are eternal. Very beautiful verse. Nachayate mriyete va kadachan nayam bhutva bhavitva nabhuya ajo nitya shashvato yam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. Let me read out the translation, 20th verse of second chapter. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, that is soul, eternal, ever existing, and prime evil. He is not slain when the body is slain. So, what happens at the time of death? Krishna says, Jatasya hi dhruvam mrityu dhruvam janma mritasya cha tasmad apriyararte na tvam sochitam harasi. One who has taken his birth, death is sure. And one who has died, reincarnation is for sure. Birth again is for sure. Krishna says, therefore, in this unavoidable discharge, therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament because a person is anyways going to die. Despite so much discussion on the subject matter of who am I, there are some category of people who still fail to understand the subject matter also. There are three prominent misunderstandings. First, misunderstanding by the philosophers. They say the soul cannot be perceived by our senses, so how can we accept it? So the question is, what can you perceive? There's so many things in this world which you cannot see. So perceive or see like that. So they say we cannot see or perceive, so therefore will not accept it. But Krishna, in the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, he gives a way. He tells us the process by which you not only perceive, but we can also see the soul. We need to have that much patience. Second misunderstanding about the soul is some people say your philosophy of soul promotes violence because we're not the body but soul, so it means we can kill anyone, and get away with it. No, not at all. Krishna has created a law of karma. Forget about killing a human being. If a person kills an animal or insect, he is culpable. It's considered homicide according to the law of nature. Maybe the law of the state may pardon you, but according to the law of the nature, it's a homicide and you will be punished for unnecessarily disturbing the lifespan of another living entity. So it does not promote violence. It's a misunderstanding. And the third misunderstanding is of and by the scientists. They say the body is made up of chemicals and we only live once. It's a dominated perspective or understanding coming from Western theology, uh, based on which the modern science is existing today. So no, that's not correct. So after describing the nature of the soul and difference with the body, now the question comes: if I am a soul, then how does my tomorrow looks different than today? Until today, I was living my life as if this body is all in all I'm supposed to enjoy. Now you're telling me I'm different than this body? I'm a soul. So how my tomorrow would look different than today is a discussion of the third, which is the second last section of this chapter 2, where Krishna talks about two duties. Two duties are activities to be performed by the soul. And what are those activities? One is called as Sanatan Dharma or Nitya Dharma, which means duties performed towards re establishing one's relationship with the Supreme Lord, which actually nourishes the soul, which is a food for the soul, which involves chanting the holy names, reading the scriptures, deity worship, service to the Lord, and on behalf of the Lord, serving everyone else. That is called as Sanatan Dharma. Second occupation is called as Swadharma, an occupation which is essential and required for the maintenance of the body, well-being of other relatives, and as a contributing member to the society. So we cannot prematurely shift in either other direction. Most of the audience are only occupied in taking care of the professional life because they're not taking care of the needs of the soul. Therefore, everyone is frustrated. Even despite of having the best of the wealth, best of the possessions, they still continue to suffer. Dissatisfied, loneliness are just some attributes of only dedicating their time and attention to occupation. Whereas some prematurely goes onto the direction of spiritual life, it may happen that today he may chant 64 rounds, but for the next 64 days, he may not even chant one round. And also we have to take care of avoiding these extremities. So Krishna provides a very simple and a balanced approach. Lord Shri Krishna, through the pages of Bhagavad Gita, through the instruction of Bhagavad Gita, is not anywhere instructing for people to renounce. Arjuna wanted to renounce, and Krishna said, "Hold on, I would not let you renounce." So this is another misnomer and misunderstanding that if I read Bhagavad Gita, if my child would read Bhagavad Gita, he would give up everything and go to the forest. No, that's not the correct thing. Rather, Lord Shri Krishna offers a very balanced approach where he tells Arjuna, to be progressive in life from wherever you are. To be progressive in life, it's very important to begin your spiritual life by bringing a harmony between your spiritual duties and your swadharma or your occupational responsibility. To the degree you're able to harmonize, that becomes yoga. That would facilitate rekindling your relationship with the Supreme Lord because that will purify your mind and heart. And that is a subject matter of these set of verses. This is a brief. In the future chapters, we'll discuss in details. So Krishna says, happiness comes from proper execution of one's swadharma. So, just to the maintenance of the body, we need to eat. We need to cover the body, protect the body from the weather condition. And to do so, we need to work. Even if you become a mendicant, you have to go and beg. You cannot think that I'll stay at one place underneath the tree and God will provide me everything. No. For the maintenance of the body, we have to work. So therefore, this swadharma cannot be given up. And then from verse number 39 to 53, Lord Shri Krishna speaks about karma yoga. So how you can dovetail your swadharma, and actually you can also convert that swadharma into nitya dharma, sanatana dharma. And that is the key of harmonizing these two. Not that these two has to be done exclusively separate. Rather, there is a homogeneous and harmonious relationship that exists between the sanatan and the swadharma. What it is called as, which is called as karma yoga. What is karma yoga? There are three prominent defects in our consciousness, which through the practice of yoga, sadhaka is supposed to get purified of. The first defect, I am the controller. Second, I am the proprietor. And third, I am the enjoyer. By the practice of yoga, these three mental defects are supposed to be rectified. So, karma yoga, your work can give you the result of yoga practices, or your work becomes yoga. How? Where you perform your duties, but utilize the result not in the spirit of exploitation, but in the spirit of service, which means utilize the result of your work in the service of the Lord. That is called as karma yoga. So Krishna brings out a very beautiful definition of renunciation. Renunciation is not about wearing an orange cloth, holding a danda. Krishna in third chapter of Bhagavad Gita calls that to be a pretender. If somebody is wearing a saffron cloth, holding a sannyas danda, and in his mind contemplating on sense objects. For a man, contemplating on a woman, contemplating on other sense objects like that. Is a pretender, he's a cheater. So Krishna does not recommend a path of renunciation like that. Krishna teaches us the spirit of renunciation. The spirit of renunciation is to give up the exploitative mentality and rather translate it into service mentality or service attitude. Giving up the exploitative mentality is renunciation. That's the answer for what is a renunciation. So, therefore, Krishna in this section defines how karma should be performed. A most famous verse which any and everyone knows. Unfortunately, they only know the first line, not the rest of the verse. कर्मण्या कर्मणेवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफल हेतुर्भुर् मा ते संगस्त कर्मणि. Lord Shri Krishna here gives the science of how to perform your work, that it enables us to become a yoga. First, कर्म करने का अधिकार है. You should perform your duty. However, the result does not depend on you. Results you cannot dictate. You will get a promotion in the upcoming evaluation or not. Would you get the first rank when you write your board exam or not? That's not up to you. Therefore, Krishna says results are not awarded by you. When the results are not awarded by you, you should not be even attached to the results. So don't get attached to the result. If you're too attached to the result, then you will remain miserable. So perform your duty with a spirit of detachment, giving up undue attachment to the results, and never ever think of not performing a duty. Like that, Lord Shri Krishna talks about it. So someone may wonder why Krishna wants Arjuna to perform his duty, or what is wrong if Arjuna takes to renunciation. The reason here is, which we'll discuss more at length tomorrow, Krishna does not want Arjuna to prematurely take to a complete renunciation when he's not ready. And Krishna tells Arjuna, and later on discussion will come, Arjuna, now you want to take renunciation, go to the forest, but in your mind is not purified of your Kshatriya propensity. What is Kshatriya propensity? If anyone comes and challenges Kshatriya, then Kshatriya would fight. And Krishna says, you might walk away from the war, but you go to the forest, somebody will come and challenge you there, then you'll fight with your sannyas danda only. You will make a sannyas danda as your weapon and you'll fight because you're not yet purified of it. Therefore, best way to move in the most progressive path of spiritual life is to harmonize our Sanatan Dharma with Swadharma, or to engage in Karma Yoga. And coming to the final section now, where Arjuna asks, my dear Lord, it sounds fabulous what you're speaking about it, that by my work, I can actually, I can make my work as yoga, I can be progressive in my spiritual life, enjoy the things of this world and enjoy the things beyond this world and be happy and progressive. I would like to know, how do I identify a person who has become successful by following what you're describing? And therefore, he asks a question. Four questions are asked by Arjuna. What are the general symptoms of person who are known as Atmana? Atmana means they do not depend on any external source for their happiness and satisfaction. They are self-satisfied. How do I know this is an Atmaram? How does such a person speak? How does such a person sit? How does such a person walk? Please elaborate. And then Lord Shri Krishna begins to speak about it. What are general symptoms? The most prominent symptom of such a person is he does not have any material desires. Hare Krishna. He does not have any material desires or desires for worldly possessions. All his needs are fulfilled through spiritual practice alone. What is his speech? The question about what is his speech means, how does he react? How does he respond to different situations when he finds success, when he finds failure, when somebody chastises, when somebody praises him? How does he respond to it? Krishna says, Sukhe dukhe samay kritma labha labho jaya jaya. He is equipoised. He is not elated when he is successful in his life. He does not become demoralized or hopeless when he is faced with crisis like that. He is free from worldly attachment, and therefore he is freed from fear and anger. If you are attached to things of the world, fear and anger comes along with it as a part, as a younger brothers. Why fear? Because you're attached to anything of this world, you know that it can either be taken away, snatched away, or else it will get destroyed over a period of time. So there's always a fear of losing. And with that comes an anger that despite whoever I am, forget about protecting anyone else, even I cannot save my own body. Therefore, there is an anger like that. How does he sit? Which means how does he control his senses? And Lord Shri Krishna gives an example of a tortoise. Just like the tortoise draws his limbs within the shell, similarly, A sage of a steady mind withdraws his senses and mind. In other words, he has a complete control on his senses and mind and can engage it accordingly. And how does he walk? Which means, how does he engages his senses? Krishna says, only in service of the Lord, not for any, uh, you know, material objective or selfish interest like that. With this, Lord Shri Krishna comes to the conclusion of the subject matter, where Lord Shri Krishna concludes the second chapter, the final discussion on the Atmaram concept, where Krishna says, how to attain a real peace. Only a person who is never disturbed by the desires, just like an ocean is not disturbed by the different river streams flowing into it, right? Just like a fish, when it is flowing up on the sea level, gets easily caught up. But when it goes deeper into the ocean, it's not possible to catch the fish or disturb the fish. Like that, when a person does not get disturbed by his flow of desires, which are constantly there, such a person attains to real peace. And thus, such a person, because not attached to his desires, such a person never gets bewildered also. And what is the result? Only such a person can enter into the kingdom of God. With this, Lord Shri Krishna concludes the second chapter where he describes this is the way of a godly or a spiritual life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered. Even if one is situated in this consciousness, even at the point of death, can attain to the kingdom of God. And then finally, we come to the conclusion where Lord Shri Krishna encourages Arjuna. Arjuna should fight, was established by the Lord in the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita. The physical activity thus being settled, the Lord will gradually refine Arjuna's motivation from self interest towards the interest of all, and ultimately towards the interest of the Lord. The second chapter revealed the real nature of the soul, and the next chapter, the Lord will explain the method to realize this nature by performing Karma Yoga or Nishkama Karma Yoga. To conclude, let us do a quick recap. The acronym for chapter 2 was Gita, where G stands for Guru, I for identity, T for two dharmas, A for Atmaram. Chapter 2 discusses three prominent subjects: the foundation of spiritual life, I'm not the body but spirit soul, the practical relevance of this knowledge. There are two practices, there are two dharmas. One is Swadharma, other is Sanatan Dharma. In the absence of spiritual knowledge, people only focuses on material progress. Therefore, despite having a material progress, look at the state of the society today. In one perspective, the kind of progress the world have made today in the last 10, 15 years, probably in the centuries, we have not seen it. There's so much progress. In fact, back in India, here in India, so many people have far much more financial capability than before. So here's my open question for all of you. What do you think about it? Despite having a bigger wallet size, your pocket, your ability and capability to spend more, having far greater comforts, having a far probably bigger house, a comfortable house, big car, and whatnot, you're probably able to provide better education for your kids, give more comforts to your family. How many of you say that the people today are equivalently, happier in higher sense as compared to a generation, one or two generations before? In other words, in a simple sense, how many of you say people today are more happy than our grandfathers? Forget about the parents, but let's talk about two generations before. How many of you think yes or no? If you think they're not happy, people today are more miserable, you can type in no. And if you think they're more happy, you can type in yes. The answer is people are more miserable today. Why? At least previously, the previous generation, they had some spiritual practice. But today, there is only material life, no spiritual life. So therefore, how does the knowledge of spirit soul helps? Practical relevance is to, balance out your professional life with spiritual life. And finally, the symptoms of those who have attained to this self realization. The general symptom, no desires. How do they speak? They are equipoised. How do they restrain their senses? They have a full control on their mind and senses. How do they engage their senses? Only in the service of the Lord. With this, we come to the conclusion. I would not read out these things. Okay, the slide is not visible. This is the concluding part of this session or presentation, where how Krishna defeats Arjuna's 5 arguments is mentioned. I'm just going to show you on the screen. All this presentation is available to all of you on your online portal on the website. You can all access it and download and review it later on. So that's just for your education purpose. Uh, well, with this, we come to the conclusion of today's session. I guess we started 5 minutes late, so I didn't took even an extra minute. I guess I'm ending on time only that way. So with this, we come to the conclusion today, and tomorrow we're going to talk about a subject title as Art of Smart Work. How to perform our work more effectively, efficiently, and particularly how to make our work as yoga. With this, we end for today. Thank you all for your kind attention and patient hearing. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you once again. Hare Krishna. Shikhar Prabhu, I guess you are
Thank
muted.
you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for
Hare
this
Krishna.
enlightening session and briefly summarized the summary of Bhagavad Gita, which is chapter 2. We have some of the interesting question coming up from audience. So before we go to question answer, I would like to remind our audience again. You, if you are not registered, you may register on the Evolve website. We have the website link there. Please do register. And there's a quizzes PPT available on the website. You can get benefited by all those PPTs. It's the same content which Prabhuji is showing, and there are some interesting quizzes as well. And please note, this is all free of cost, no registration charges. Okay, so it's time to go ahead and deep dive into the questions which audience are putting. First of all, I'm putting a question from Rohit Bhalera. Sorry. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, although we understand we are, all our souls, why do we get attracted to materialistic things again and again? Is it the sanskar slash habit which we have carried from past incarnations?
Uh, so question is, I'm a spirit soul, yet why am I attracted towards the material things? So knowing is not sufficient. Acting on that knowledge is required. So right now, in theory, we know I am a spirit soul, not the body. But unless we start with the experimentation, start applying that knowledge into an action and practice, until then, purification of our consciousness would not happen. And until our consciousness is purified, until then or till that point of time, we'll remain attracted to different sense objects. And why are we attracted to sense objects? Because we have been into this world for millions, billions, and trillions of lifetimes doing the 4 things: ahar, nidra, bhaya, mathana. Eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. And I've been trying to fulfill these desires from the time immemorial. Um, there is a very famous book, How Habits Are Created. I'm forgetting the exact title, where a very famous psychologist mentions if you do certain thing for 21 days, it becomes a habit. We are doing not certain things, we are doing the same aha, nidra, bhaya, methano things for millions of lifetimes. You can imagine how deep rooted it would be. So it's not that, just by knowing I'm a spirit soul, our deep rooted, so deep rooted habits would get changed. Therefore, a very important question indeed asked by Rohit. Therefore, we have to take to the right spiritual practice. Without it, it does not work out. Imagine you hear about in your chemistry class mixing 1 or 2 chemicals, will give you a third chemical. You go to the lab and you take those 2 chemicals and mix as you feel like. Do you ever think that chemical will be formed? There is a lab technician will tell you 5 ml of chemical A, 2.5 ml of chemical B. You have to add like this and this much proportion and this style and this way, and mix it gently, and then leave it for 5 minutes aside, and there you go. After 5 minutes, you have the chemical. So you knew in theory, if you mix two chemicals, you'll get the third chemical. Yet there is a technician, a lab technician, to guide you how to do it. And you personally did it. So we have to take to the spiritual process. Just for example, as His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder of ISKCON, gave it to all of us. Wake up early in the morning, chant the holy names of the Lord, 16 rounds. Follow four regulative principles: no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, no illicit sex. Eat Krishna Prasadam. Give up bad association of materialistic people. Take association of devotees. Give up reading novels, watching mundane movies, etc., which distract your mind and fill your mind with lusty desires. Rather, replace it with, reading Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. Visit temple, take to some services. When we change our lifestyle like this, then gradually all these deep rooted desires and habits will begin to fade away. And when we continue to engage ourselves in positive spiritual engagements, they create further positive samskaras, which not only covers up all those previous negative samskaras, but in fact, bhakti is so powerful, it burns up all those previous samskaras wherein it ceases to exist. And therefore, bhakti is so potent. And Srila Prabhupada proved it by transforming hippies into happies. Those hippies who were into all kinds of sinful activities, addicted to sinful activities, gave up everything. And that was the most astonishing thing for their parents, for the teachers, and even for the governments. So somebody asked Srila Prabhupada, generally the sadhus, yogis, and mystic, they do some miracle. What is your miracle? And Prabhupada said, see, these white elephants are my miracles. These young American boys and girls, they were hippies, they were drunkards, they were womanizers, abusers. Today, they have given up everything. They're living a simple monastic life. And that's a miracle. Indeed, I would say this is the only miracle. Everything is chota mota jadu tona. This is the actual miracle. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji. Next question is from Varun Agrawalji. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, how does one identify his or her prescribed duties? Most of us know what we should not do, but it is very difficult to know what we should do within the realm of Krishna consciousness.
Not exactly sure. Are you indicating towards your professional duty? That's what probably prescribed duty you're indicating to. In terms of what not to do, that boundary has been defined. No meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, no illicit sex. And within it, you are allowed to enjoy as much as you want to enjoy. Now, what to do if your question in terms of prescribed duty, which means probably that's what your question means for your occupation, um, Prabhupada would say, make the best use of that bargain. If you're 35-year-old, it's too late for you to figure it out. The process to figuring it out what's your prescribed or what's your occupational duty, the right kind of occupational duty, begins at the age of 5 or 7 when a child is sent to a gurukul. There, under the guidance or tutelage of a teacher or a guru, his inclinations are observed and he's encouraged in those inclinations are, the nature, swabhava, which gradually he cultivates and gets settled into that occupation. If you're already graduated from engineering college, you have to stuck with engineering. What else can you do? You know, yeah, maybe you can take a radical step like some of us, give up everything, become a monk. But definitely, that was not an occupational duty for any one of us. It's just a case of a causeless mercy. So rather than getting too much bogged about or bothered about what, in terms of your occupation, just do the needful now. Right now, accept and what should I say? Uh, accept spiritual practices. Add spiritual practices, spiritual content into your life. That itself will bring you a lot of joy and happiness, and will make you happy in your life. Varunji, is making sense? If not, you can counter question. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. The next question is from Santosh Kumar. How to be balanced in our office work and also our personal family life?
That is the content of next 16 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. Stay tuned, you'll get an answer.
Okay. Then I think he's asking one more question. Let's see if we can pick this. How to attain self realization as our mind is always distracted?
Yeah, correct. There's a process. Good question. There's a process. You know, your mind is always distracted. How to attain it? There's a process of control the mind. Abhyasena tu kante vairagya chagrihite. Lord Shri Krishna says how to control that? By practice and by cultivating suitable detachment. What is suitable detachment? Make sure not to engage in four sinful activities. No meat eating, no gambling, no intoxication, and no illicit sex. That's becoming detached with these sinful activities. Abhyas practice refers to waking up early, reading of scriptures, hearing about scriptures, chanting 16 rounds of Hare Krishna Mahamantra. At your stage, if you're new to the spiritual life, you can begin with chanting of one round of Hare Krishna Mahamantra, which means 108 times chanting of Hare Krishna Mahamantra. You can begin with that. So you have to take to the practice and you have to follow the practice. Otherwise, it's just not going to get fixed up so easily. So just let's just not discuss about it. Let's just not talk about it. Let's do it. When you do it, you get an experience which gives you more faith. Experience is the best teacher. So please take advantage of it. All right. Anything else?
Yes. Next question from Gopal Raut. Why chapter second of Bhagavad Gita recite when someone leaving the body?
Well, not exactly. Different people recite different chapters of Bhagavad Gita when people depart. In some tradition, people recite the 15th chapter. Some recite second chapter. Some recite eighth chapter. So, well, for the second chapter, the purpose is because there Krishna mentions you're not the body but spiritual. That is the objective if somebody recites. And for that also largely you should recite 11th verse to the 30th verse. Everything else would not be relevant when a person have departed. So you can recite the 11th verse to 30th verse, which actually brings solace. When you read the 11th to the 30th verse of the second chapter, which tells you, not the body but spirit, and spiritual never ends, never dies. It's eternal, which means your relative, your friend, whoever has departed away, has not died. It's the body that has died, and the body is supposed to die nonetheless. So that such wisdom brings solace. That's the reason people read it. All right.
All right, Prabhuji. Next is from Sukalpa Chakravarti. Namaskar. Can you kindly elaborate the aspect of in service of Lord?
Not very clear what exactly question means. Are you saying how to serve the Lord? Or Shikhar, you want to say something if you understood? In
Prabhuji, I
service
think
of.
question is yeah. In when you discuss about that, there's a Nitya Dharma, right? And Swadharma. So the Sanatan Dharma is in service to Lord. What do you mean by?
So how to serve in the service of the Lord, as I said, man mana bhava madbhakto madayaji mam namaskar. Krishna himself defines it later on in Bhagavad Gita, chanting the holy names of the Lord. In the first chapter, first of all, let me establish this again. In the very first chapter, we had already discussed, we did that recap also today. The beauty of relationship between the Lord Sri Krishna and his devotees is very difficult to figure out who is the Lord, who is the servant, because both the parties are into the consciousness of serving each other. So it becomes very difficult. So first of all, be very clear: the word service is not in a negative connotation of getting exploited. Service is actually a privilege in relationship with the Lord. Second thing, how do we serve the Lord? Serve the Lord means how do we please the Lord? As Lord have dictated. Man mana madbhakto madhyaji manas. Offer me respect, worship me, chant my name, remember me. How can you remember? The best way of remembering is by chanting the names of the Lord. So we chant the holy names of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We read scriptures like Bhagavad Gita. We hear like you are attending these classes. We get into association, the devotee take association more and more, and gradually we give up the bad association, bad practices. Like that, we serve the Lord and we please the Lord. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So I'm putting the next question. It's little bit long. It's in three parts coming as. So I'll try to see if I can make a summary of it. So the first is from Kiran Kulkarni. Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. You have quoted in today's lecture that we should not expect any results for the work we do. In this relevance, you have given an example of appearing in the exams. When we prepare hard, go get that correct. But how we cannot expect the results of hard work that we have put in. Will you please comments for my better understanding?
Yeah, wonderful question. Actually, that's the whole issue. That's the whole problem. You have to understand, the whole issue arises with unmet expectations. Why we feel frustrated. For example, just a couple of weeks before, I was having a session, and that time India Pakistan match was about to begin. So many suggested me that it was not a good idea to have your public program today because there's going to be a cricket match. I said, fine, but we have scheduled it, we'll still go ahead. And we went ahead. The next morning, when I woke up later in the day, when I saw the news headline, I saw the headline that India got defeated. And I was kind of thinking that, and of course, there were messages like, people were angry, the Pakistanis were rejoicing, in India, people were complaining and whatnot. And you know that what happened later on, there were a lot of police arrests because some people in India rejoiced for Pakistanis and all that happened. So, see, what is the need of abusing cricketers and whatnot? Well, they have not signed a contract with you that because I'm going to play a cricket match, I am bound to win the cricket match for you. Any game, anything, it involves winning or losing. One party has to win, one party has to lose. Why people become so frustrated, so angry? Some people actually gave threat to the daughter of Virat Kohli, isn't it? It was all over the news. Why? Because they had such a huge expectation that Indian cricket team should win the match. That's the point. The result is not in your hand. You can give your best shot, but what's going to happen is not into your hands because nobody controls the destiny in that way. So that's something we need to understand. If we don't understand, we will continue to suffer and remain miserable. As I gave an example, so many people got so upset. What to speak of what happened here? You might have heard about then Pakistan lost against Australia. And then I read in the headline the Pakistanis were abusing their own cricketers. And they were the same people who were glorifying their cricketers when they defeated India and when they got defeated by Australia. It was so vulgar language they were speaking. Does it make sense? It just do not make sense. But people get too attached with their understanding of what results should be. But actually, it's never like that. So please do your work sincerely, but do not be too much caught up with your understanding of what result I should get in return, because result is not in our hand. I hope it's making sense, Kiranji. If it ain't, you can type in another question. I'll try to help you say something on it.
So, Prabhu, thank you. So, there's a clarification coming from Varun Agrawal on his question. So, I'd like to take that first, and then we'll move to few of those. So, he was
You
saying,
all able to hear the questions? Okay. Yes.
so just a clarification on the question that we discussed before. Varun Agrawal is typing that. My question was not exactly about occupational duty, but every duty other than occupation, like towards family, society, nation, and so on. Sometimes life throws curveballs.
Okay. So apart from occupation towards family, society, and everything, yes. So that's also been discussed and described. See, in general, these are subject matters of personal consultation based on individual's life and the life choices available to one, depending on the family situation. The decisions are made or advice is given. But in general, the approach of a devotee towards any of the situation, towards a family, towards a society, towards a nation, or for that reason, every living entity. Scripture says, Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The whole world is my home. Every living entity is my brother and sister. The general understanding is of a service attitude that we serve rather than exploiting from other. So that's the perspective that Bhagavad Gita or Vedic scriptures talk about. We should perform our duty responsibly. That's another thing. Somebody has already taken to a married life, married ashram, is his and her responsibility, vice versa, to perform that responsibility in married ashram dutifully. So, therefore, in third chapter, we'll see Lord Shri Krishna says more on the subject matter. It is far better to perform one's duty faultily than to perform someone else's duty perfectly. Because your duty, which are there for you, even if you're not able to do perfectly, will still help you purify. And another thing that we'll discuss and we'll learn tomorrow, the purpose of work is not for making money. The purpose of work is for purification of the heart. Therefore, you see how, the way the scriptures are designed. In other words, how comprehensive understanding of the psychology is there, because they know, because the scriptures dictates, the teachers, that our flaws are the controller, proprietor, and joshua mentality, and to set us free of that mentality, we need to do a voluntarily sacrifice. Therefore, scripture says every householder must compulsory give a dhan as charity, because everyone is too attached to their wealth. And scripture says, now you give dhan. Lord Shri Krishna himself going to speak on this subject matter in 17th chapter. So that way it all gets balanced. So again, coming back to your question about prescribed duties towards family and society, family take care of them as see them as the servants of the Lord. Try to give them the best of spiritual care and attention, provide for them, and similarly towards the society, try to inculcate spiritual values. Try to raise the consciousness of your community by giving them the copy of Bhagavad Gita, by sharing the message of Bhagavad Gita, by spreading spiritual education. That is what our prescribed duty is in relation to family, society, nation, and everyone. And make sure treat every living entity as you would like to be treated by others. Do not mistreat, do not exploit, and of course, never ever kill an animal and eat. That's an act of violence. Is that okay, Varunji? Fine, Shikabu. Till the time Varun responds, we'll go to the next
Yes.
question.
Sure, Prabhuji. We received the response from others participants as well, and they are, yeah, the question have been addressed. Yeah, they are giving the feedback. The all question have been addressed. So I'm putting this question from Sandhya ji. She's saying while chanting, mind is distracting. Sometimes, any suggestion, Prabhuji?
Many congratulations. You are already pretty advanced because your mind is only getting distracted sometimes. For most of us, the challenge is our mind is always distracted. Only sometimes we are chanting. So no problem. Continue chanting on special days like Ekadashi, etc. You can chant more rounds. To be able to overcome this distraction of mind, we need to continue chanting and chant more. That's the instruction of Vedic scriptures. Srila Rupa Goswami mentions that in Nectar of Instruction, text number 7, where he says, gives an example of bile, I believe, right? The treatment for it is taking sweet. Is that bile? What do you call it? As Pito patapta rasanasyana kochikano. What is Pito patapta in English? There is some
But
disease where you can remove the disease only through sugar candy. I'm forgetting the English name of Pito patapta. It's a disease of the stomach. So the more sugar candy you take, gradually you get fixed. And the sugar candy that point of time tastes very bitter. But the only treatment of overcoming that problem of stomach is only by taking sugar. And you continue taking, gradually the problem of the stomach, the problem of the taste goes away, and then you recover your original taste, and now you can relish the sugar. Similarly, continue chanting. That's the only way to be able to control your mind gradually. That's the one thing. And second thing, His Grace Burijan Prabhu talks about it as a very, very important tip. Our mind generally, the nature of the mind is to get complicated when you give it a task. When you sit and chant, do not give any task or any action to items to the mind. Sit and chant, and before every round you begin, my dear mind, not even round. Every time when you're chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra, you should only think of, let me just hear what I'm chanting now. Let me just hear. When you begin to, kind of speak like this to yourself, to your mind, the mind cools down. When you say, okay, my dear mind, I'm going to chat one round, the mind gets into anxiety. Oh, one round means 7, 8 minutes, 108 times. And more difficult it is when you say, I'm going to sit and chant for 16 rounds now. The mind says, okay, I'm not going to cooperate at all. So don't talk to mind anything about chanting this many rounds, that many rounds. Just say, okay, I'm just going to chant this mantra. My dear mind, please hear it. And just continue doing that. And that way you'll be able to deal with the distractions on the mind. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah,
So,
jaundice, correct. That is
yeah.
called as jaundice. Pito
So,
patap tarasana. Yes, please.
last question from today's session, Prabhuji, is
Hmm.
again from Rohitji. Um, Hare
Yes.
Krishna, Prabhuji, is there a way to know which stage of spiritual journey someone stands at currently? Is there any way to
There is
measure?
a whole book written by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur called as Madhurya Kadambani, an English cloud bank of nectar, which goes into an exhaustive details to tell you of which stage in spiritual progress you are. That's the one thing. Second thing, uh, how much free we are becoming from our material desires, how much free we are becoming from the desires for these four sinful activities, depending on from where you are starting your spiritual life. If somebody is starting spiritual life already at a pious level, then how much attraction we are developing towards the chanting, reading, and hearing about Krishna. How much attraction are we developing towards association of Vaishnavas only? How much attraction we are developing of only visiting holy dhams and no more wastage of money and planning out some, what you call as summer vacation to Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, etc., etc., like that. So there are many ways you can figure it out. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. So that brings us to the end of this session. I would like to thank
So
all the audience again.
thank you, Shikhar Prabhu. Thanks to all the audience who joined in again for this English program. Tomorrow begins a working day, so God only knows how many people will be able to turn up. So we will still hope to see you tomorrow. There were some suggestions that we should move our English discussion from YouTube to Zoom. So I don't know, Shikarpur, you have taken a feedback from the audience. If the
Yes.
audience is still there, if they're able to hear this question, you can quickly type in about moving on to the Zoom, then the YouTube. Let us know about it. For the English, we can probably start that from tomorrow. So thank you so much, Shikarpur, and thanks to all the audience. Shila Prabhupada ki Jai.
Okay.